Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Pedic Test, Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Ayin Vav. We left off on Daf Ayin Vav, Amid Aleph, second line from the top of the Amid. We are dedicating today's class Le'ilui Nishmas Yosef ben Faraji. May his neshama have an aliyah. That's Yakir's father, and continue to have nachas from his kids and from his grandchildren. Amen.
Amen.
And we are in middle of learning the sugya of Shatnes. I just realized that being that we're learning Zerayim, and we have so many Masechtas following Kalayim, the next one is Shavias, that will be about agricultural law. This is really like a window. It's like something very out of place, in which we're learning about something that even city boys like ourselves are learning something that's right now very practical. Now, we may not wear Bein Ba'aretz, Bein B'chutz La'aretz. On a biblical level, we're not allowed to wear a garment that has in it wool and linen. Many, many more details to follow. I know that Ido asked the question yesterday, what happens if you have a garment that on one part of it is wool, on the other part is linen, but they never touch in the garment? So let's say wool, cotton, and linen, just as an example. Like, we're going to learn about so many pratim over the next couple of dafin. B'negeya the isur of shatnes. Shatnes is a choik. Even though it's a choik, just to share some chasidus on shatnes, that wool, and we're speaking specifically, like we mentioned, sheep's wool is a physical manifestation of the midah of chesed, and linen is a physical manifestation of the midah of gevura. And even though a person has to be balanced, and that's the uniqueness that we spoke about yesterday, that we have the capacity, because we are Adam Elyon, Tikkun, that we are able to have and to be connected to actually opposites, but chesed itself and gevura itself are not allowed to be mixed. That will destroy the world. The world comes from the tension that is created by there being opposite forces. And chesed and gevura are opposite forces. But let's leave it at that, and therefore we cannot mix them. Now, what we did discuss at the end of Daf Ayin Hey, Amid Beis, is that there are many products that are similar to linen. Not only are they similar to linen, but they actually have what we call a Shem Levi together with linen. There's something that's called Pishton Shel Yam. Literally, that means linen of the sea. We said yesterday it's referring to some sort of reed that grows near the sea that has linen-like fibers. And the Gemara made it very clear that Pishton Shel Yam with wool, even rabbinically, is not asur. The only prohibition is like tzemer. The only type of wool that's prohibited is pure tzemer. We don't have, scripturally, we don't have another product that has tzemer and something else. It's only tzemer. The pishton that Hashem is referring to is only to pure pishton and not a pishton that has a shem levi. Now, we're going to continue learning about this topic. And the Gemara is going to show you how indeed Semet scripturally doesn't have anything accompanied with it. I said that that's only scripturally, because we just learned in last chapter something called Semer Geffen. Semer Geffen is cotton. And I know that there's no issue with cotton, but you don't have such an expression anywhere in Tanakh. Mashe Enkein Pishton, you have even in Tanakh other products that have the word Pishton and something else, and that is not included on any level with the Isur of Shatnes. Now we're going to learn some more pratim of Tzoras Begadim. Don't forget, the Mishnah gave us the 3 dinim. We're going to learn today more details about the Big Day Kahuna. All of these 3, the Isur of wearing Shatnes and clothing, Tzoras Begadim, and Big Day Kahuna, are comprised of Tzemer Upishtin, and all of them have this rule that what type of Pishtan are we referring to? Only pure Pishtan, and not a variety of Pishtan, right? Not a variety of linen that will have in its name pishtan something, or something pishtan that will never be included in any of these 3 dinim. We will also continue today learning about the rule in the Mishnah that allowed for us to create bittul. So, for example, if a person has camel's hair in the raw state, and then you have sheep's wool, and you mix them together, if roiv is camel's hair, it's camel's hair. It's not a problem. You can then mix that with linen. In other words, what we have to make clear is that the Isur of Shatnes is only when we have wool and linen in their finished state. That's important. Finished state will mean it's spun, it's already a thread. Prior to either wool or linen being in their finished state, when they are what we will call in their raw state, it's not asur at all. There's no issue. So, for example, ein mevatren isur lechatchila does not apply if a person were to take raw camel's hair and raw wool and mix them together with the kavana of ultimately mixing it with linen. It's not a problem because there was never an isur to begin with. And we're going to learn another prat of what we learned in the Mishnah, that if you have a large garment and it has shatnez, even only on one end, even only the hem of a very long garment that never goes on your body, it drags on the floor. Let's say if it's a wool garment and it has a linen hem, that makes it usher for you to wear any part of the garment. And on that, we're going to have unbelievable stories in the Gemara, stories of Amoraim, how careful they were when it came to shatnez. And if we'll have time, we'll begin what we'll have in the bottom of Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis, a statement of Rav. Guys, we are familiar with the statement. Rav Amar, Kol Shuhu Mishu Maras Ayin Asur Afilu B'Chadri Chadarim. And we're going to see how that topic is very much a negeya to our sugya. So Chavra Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis, we just said that Pishton Shalyam is mutter to be mixed together with wool. And why is that? Because we made this hekesh. Since the Torah says it's asur together, tzemer or pishtin, just like tzemer in scripture, you'll never find anything else that has tzemer something or something tzemer. Tzemer is tzemer, period. What pishtin is asur pishtin? If it's a variety of pishtan that's called with pishtan something or something pishtan, it will be mutter. Now, minayin, how do you know that indeed? She'en le'shem levai. So Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and he's quoting here a pasuk where what that says, a pasuk in Malachim, and the pasuk reads that Umeisha Melech Moav was a noiked. And before we continue, what does a noiked means? The Gemara says, you know what the word noiked? This king was a roya. Roya means he's a shepherd. And the reason why a shepherd is called a noiked are various reasons. One of them are given. But Pnei Moshe says because the word noiked means a counter, and shepherds would return the sheep to their owners every day by giving a head count. It's one of those things that's how you do it. You get it with a head count, you give it back with a head count. So a shepherd is called a noiked. The shepherd, the koyach of the shepherd, the medrash of Moshe Rabbeinu, how a shepherd is so careful with every single sheep. Doesn't allow one sheep to go astray. And if it goes astray, it runs after the sheep. Okay. Now, continues the pasuk, he would pay the king of Israel, Meya Elef Karim, 100,000 Karim are fat sheep, and Omeya Elef Elim, summit. 100,000 rams, summit. Which only means that they had wool attached to them. Now, the Pnei Moshe says that the diuk is that why wouldn't it say Meya Elef Elim Bit Summit? Bit Summit means when they have their wool attached to them. That would be the correct statement. But the pasuk doesn't say that. It says rams, wool, Elim, Summit. And that is that from there we are being medayik, says the Gemara, that Ein Lecha Korin Tzemer, Elat Tzemer Elim Bilvad. That Summit and Elim go together. Because if it's not from sheep, and if it's not a simple product, which is the wool of a sheep, we will never use the word summit. So it's not only that we don't find such an expression in scripture. I take that back. It's from this pasuk where medayik that semet must refer to only pure semet. And now we have the hekesh again. Mat semet she'ein le'shem levai af kol davar, which goes to pishtan. What type of pishtan is included in the isur? Only if it's pure. Very nice. Very nice, Gabe. As if we didn't know. Here we go. L'chaim. That was both the fattened sheep with a lot of wool.
Exactly.
Okay, now we're moving on to the second of the three dinim, where semer upishtim are to exclude all other fibers. Ein lochametama b'negoyim, tumas negoyim, right? Parshas Tazria is elot semer upishtim. And how do we know that? So says the Gemara, and we're quoting here a pasuk in Parshas Tazria, right? The pasuk reads, that the habeged kiyah boy negatzoras, and then the Torah continues to define what type of beged, the beged semen or the beged pishtin, clearly excluding all other begad. Now let's continue learning with the Braisa. There are more limitations by the halachos of nigei begadim. Yachol, one might have thought, by only quoting this pasuk in Tazria, which Taka says semed or pishtim, only these two. But if it's semed or pishtan, there it's not mixed, either or. Maybe yometamin ben tzivuyim ben she'enam tzivuyim. Maybe it would make no difference whether they are dyed, whether they're not dyed, whether they're colored, whether they're not colored. No. So Talmud loimed bebeget semed or bebeget pishtim. And here again, I just want to, the premise is that it's not common to have linen dyed, D-Y-E-D, it's not common. And the Torah juxtaposes both to tell you that ma pishtan, again, that's the source, not common for it to be dyed. Kibriyasa, people leave linen in their natural state. The type of semed that is vulnerable to acquire and therefore to convey. But let's begin to acquire. Only kibriyasai. And by the way, as the Gemara will say explicitly, here is where the isur of shatnez and the halachas of nigei begadim differ, separate one from the other. By shatnez, there is no such a rule. Makes no difference whether it's colored or not colored. The Gemara will speak it out. But let's begin. By nigei begadim, it's not only semer or only pishtan, but it has to be undyed. It has to be uncolored. So says the Braisa, well, uncolored. So let's say if you have a black wool garment, but it became black because it was dyed. Okay, that's excluded. But what happens if you have, the black sheep? And the black sheep is called a black sheep because it has black wool. Naturally, is that also excluded? But maybe I should not exclude. Look at these words. That's that the white beard, that's the natural color. All other colors is dyed. Talmud loimer v'la pishtim v'la tzomer. So here we're quoting another pasuk, and it's mamish one after the other. The first pasuk was Vayikra Yud Gimel, pasuk Mem Zayin. Now we're going to Vayikra Yud Gimel, Pedek Yud Gimel, Pashas Tazria, pasuk Mem Ches, and the pasuk. I'm reading the whole pasuk. Oy b'shasi, oy ba'erev, la pishtim v'la tzomer. These are completely superfluous words because the pasuk right before just said beged semer or beged pishtim. So why does the Torah repeat? Talmud loimer la pishtim v'la tzomer. The repetition is to tell you no, only white. Ma pishtim is levana, af semer loven. So even if you have a naturally black wool because it comes from a black sheep, it is excluded from the dinim of nigei begadim. And that will be that if you have on a beged or even on fibers, if you have the color, a certain type of red or a certain type of green, or both, it becomes tummy. Now, therefore, says the Gemara, Taninon Terein Klalim. Our Mishnah put together two rules. And really, the Mishnah put together three rules, but we're up to the second. The first rule is shatnez, and the second rule is negei begadim. So says the Gemara, now you know, v'loy dam yandein l'dein. Even when Rabbeinu HaKadosh juxtaposes two rules together, it never has to mean that they are mamish similar from A and from Aleph to Tav. No, like over here, they're not fully similar. Taninon, we just learned, right? And the first rule, ein asur mishum kalayim. Ein noi is our girsa, and here in the Braisa it's ein asur mishum kalayim elatzamer pishtim. And indeed, clearly, the rule of shatnez is bein tzivoim bein lebanim. Whether they're naturally colored, whether they were humanly dyed, doesn't make a difference. They are still included in the prohibition. However, Taninon, we just learned in the Braisa that ain't the time of the Goyim, Elot Samar Pishtim, but Ubulvad Levanim. So Rabbi Yoina from Beitzra asked in front of Rabbi Mana, Tama, not Omar Ben Tzvim Ben Levanim. You just said by Kalayim, by the Isur of Kalayim, Kilei Bigadim, makes no difference. And Vahach Ata Omar Ubulvad Levanim. Right? What's the basis for this distinction? Maybe we should not make such a distinction. So Rav Mana responded, as we learned before, that Shanyahi, the reason why nigei begadim are different, Sheshana olav akasa, because the Torah repeated, as we mentioned, you have in Vayikra Yud Gimel, pasuk Mem Zayin, And Vayikra Yud Gimel Pasuk Memches, and when the Torah repeats the words like we just mentioned, La Pishtem Vilat Summit, it's mamish superfluous. Why did the Torah repeat it? Shnei Pa'amim, to tell you a unique halacha. Ma Pishtem Kibriyasa. Kibriyasa means that just like Pishtem is regularly left in its natural state, and that is white. Aft Semed, it has to be white. Kibriyasa. Okay, and now moving on to the third din in the Mishnah. What's the third din in the Mishnah? Eina kahanim loifshim. Kahanim only wear, like we mentioned, either tzemed or pishtim, and just a richazer. That really we have, let's call big day kohen hedit. We have big day kohen gadol. The kohen gadol wears a ksonus that will touch as a tunic made out of linen. The mikbaas, which is the word that's used for the hat of the kohen hedit. The word mikbaas refers to a turban, but it's a turban that it goes very gavoya. That's mikbaas. It goes very high because there's no reason to make it low. Versus by the Kohen Gadol, because he wore the tzitz, they purposefully did not have the hat going very high pointing. The hat was very, very low. That's why the name is different, right? But it's really the same beged, which is a hat, a turban. Then you have a michnasaim, the breechers. And all of these three, vadai only linen. And as we mentioned, by the Kohen Hedyot, there's a machloikas rishonim whether the avnate of the Kohen Hedyot was only linen or was it shatnez. The Kohen Gadol wore an additional 4 garments, and for sure the choshet and the ephod and the avnate of the Kohen Gadol had in it wool and linen, not only wool and linen, just to make that clear, wool and linen and golden threads, and then you had the tzitz, which was purely made out of gold. Now, let's go inside. Now we're going to go to psukim that we have in Parshas Acharei Mois, and the Torah reads, let me read the whole pasuk. This is Vayikra, Tezayin pasuk Dalid, Ksoinis bad kodesh yilbash, umichnesei bad kodesh yal, umichnesei bad yal b'soroi, ubaavnei bad yachgod. And by the Kohen Gadol, his hat is called mitznefes, also a turban, but it's a low turban. It doesn't have a tall, but it's low. Bad hitznoi, big day kodesh heim, v'rachatz b'mayim es b'soroi ulevesha. So now says Rabbi Ze'eda, let's go on the Gemara. Except it says Ksoinis bad kodesh yilbash. We're speaking about the Kohen Gadol's entering the Holy of Holies. That there, when he enters the Holy of Holies, the Ksoinis has to be bad. Bad, what does bad mean? So bad, beis dalit, that refers to linen. How does bad, why does bad mean linen? Sometimes the Torah calls linen pishtan, right? By shatnis. Sometimes the Torah calls pishtan sheish. Why is the Torah called, why is linen also referred to as bad? And as we mentioned in our intro, that Al-Pi Chasidus, Al-Pi Kabbalah, linen is Gevura. You know why it's called Gevura? Because Gevura separates between one and the other. And the word bad means individually. In other words, what's unique about linen is that each stalk of flax, right, from which the linen is processed, grows separately. From one stalk is produced from one flaxseed. One stalk, one flaxseed. Problem is that wool also, one hair comes out of one follicle, comes out of one little hole. So if bad doesn't really refer to linen, bad refers to individualized, and we're saying the only type of fiber that comes one from one, verstehst, one stalk from each flaxseed, from one stalk, you make one fiber, so is wool. That's the Gemara's kasha. Every year grows.
Thank you for teaching me the reasons behind Hebrew.
Bad. Now I want to know, in modern Hebrew, when they say linen, how do they say linen today? They say pishtan or they say bad? Yakir, we can't hear you. Yakir, we can't hear you. Doesn't matter. Okay, you're muted for a reason. Weiter. We're married men. There we go. So Akasha answers the Gemara. Peirush beKabbalah. Right, guys, remember Kabbalah in the Nigla of the Torah refers to Nevi'im. Who remembers what others? There's only one sefer in Ksuvim that's called Kabbalah. Who remembers? Nigila assessed it. The word Kabbalah validei Avodah Nevi'im Kabbalah. Now in Kabbalah it says, now according to pasuk in Yecheskel, v'lo yale aleim semer b'sharsam Since you have a pasuk in you, you're right. Wool also grows by itself. Aber since a pasuk says in Yecheskel explicitly that when the Kohen Gadol goes to serve God, and that's referring lefnai v'lefnim. That's referring to the Holy of Holies, that he's not allowed to have tzemer on his body. So a pasuk in Yecheskel is megale that when it says an achrei mois, ksoinis bat kodesh, obviously it cannot mean tzemer. It must mean linen. And all of this, there's a lot to talk about, because again, like we mentioned, tzemer is chesed, and taka, why does chesed grow individually? Why does tzemer grow individually? Isn't separation a characteristic of Gvura? And shouldn't mayim is chesed? Mayim is it connects one with the other. So part of chesed is giving people space. And actually, the Chassidus says that the act of tzimtzum, the helen, is God's kindness. And a lot more to speak about that. And let's go right now. In other words, now that we have, let's continue. Now let's continue with the pasuk in Yecheskel. You proved from Yecheskel that lefnai v'lefnim, that's called hapnimis v'boisa. There's no tzemer. What does that imply? That when the Kohen Gadol is serving God, but not in the Holy of Holies, when he's serving God mibachutz, then yes, oila aleim, then he does wear wool. But we already said that an achrei mois, ksoinis bad means linen. So if he's wearing linen and wool, clearly you see araya that we only exclude wool on Yom Kippur. When he goes l'fnai v'lefnim, that the rest of the year, or even on Yom Kippur, when he's mishamish bachutz, he's wearing wool and linen. Now, minayin she'emutar mikalayim. That refers to the Kohen Hedyet. Again, I said our sugya seems to imply that even the Kohen Hedyet is wearing shatnez, which is on the belt. But how do you know they are allowed? So now we're going to a pasuk in Pekudei. As it says, and here you have the word sheish. And here this pasuk is referring not to the Kohen Gadol, which is the pasuk of Achrei Mois. This pasuk in Pekudei is about the Kohen Hedyet. Hey, look at this. I take it back. Mitznefes is Kohen Gadol, sheish. Pa'arei hamikbo'os, we just said, that's Kohen Hedyet, sheish. Vesmichnesei habod, sheish, which is Moshe, twisted sheish. And then it says in the next pasuk, ve'eso avnei sheish Moshezon. So that's clearly sheish is referring to linen. But then we say utchelas vargoma v'tor lashoni. And now let's go right there, and it says, now we're going back to a pasuk in Kabbalah, to a pasuk in Yecheskel, that's referring to Pa'arei Pishtan Yol Rosham. Again, that Pa'arei Pishtan, so what sheish? How do you know what sheish is? Because when the pasuk says in Pekudei that they're putting Pa'arei Migbo'os, Kohen Hedyet, on the head, and in Yecheskel we call it Pa'arei Pishtan. So sheish in Toiras Moshe is in Yecheskel Pishtan. Clearly sheish is Pishtan. Sheish means linen. And with the detail regarding the Michnosayim, I'm sorry, that when you put on the belt, the optics is to make your chayger, right? You girdle yourself with your belt. The pasuk writes in Yecheskel, don't put it in a location where one perspires. As the Rambam says, by the way, the belt was very, very, very long. And it's unlike when we put on a gartel. Just to know, today when we put on a gartel, we should put it on top of the tarpesh hakavod. When we put on a gartel, when we daven, actually the Rebbe was very careful with that. The front part of the gartel is a lot higher than the back part of the gartel, and for sure not to put it on the height of one's belt. Avada not, because all of that is also connected to the avoid of the kohen. And so this picture is really not that great because they would wrap it around themselves. Elamah, they didn't put it all the way up to under the armpits. That is where people sweat. People sweat in their bodies in two locations, under the armpits and on top of the waistline. So when they would girdle themselves with the gartel, they would go, it would occupy a big part of their body, but it began only from their elbows, not above their elbows. Verstehst? And it didn't go so low down where it's going to enter the lower area on the body where a person perspires. Anyways, so here you see, since in Pekudei, mitznefes sheish, Yecheskel, Pa'are pishtim. So now you know what sheish is. Dora sheish mi sheish, sheish mi pa'are mi pa'are. If you follow the whole thing over here, it's going to come out that what did they wear? They wore the avnei. Sheish means linen. But hold on. But the tcheles and argomen and toy lashoni, that has to be wool. As we know, tcheles can only be dyed on wool. So here clearly you see that kohanim, when they wore their belt, both sheish, mashazar, and tcheles and argomen and toy lashoni. 3 wools dyed in tcheles in toy lashoni. Now let's go a little bit into this. Into these dyes. So says the Gemara that just like the toilas, mashni toilas, dover she'esh b'ruach hachayim, where did the dye come from? Chevra, the dye came from. We learned this in the Rambam in Hilchas Paraduma, Pei Gimel Halacha Beis, that in certain, according to the Rambam, in certain fruits there was a little bug, a little worm, and they would get the dye red from the worm. Worm is a living creature. So ma shni toilas comes from davar sheyesh b'ruach hayim. So too, both the tcheles and the argomon, it has to come from davar sheyesh b'ruach hayim. Now the mystery is the purple, the argomon. When it comes to the tcheles, it's not a mystery. We all know that the tcheles has to come from a chilazon. The chilazon is a snail sheyesh b'ruach hayim, and not indigo that we have befedish. No, it cannot come from a plant. It has to come from a living creature. Same thing when it comes to the purple dye, it has to come from davar sheyesh b'ruach hayim. Bottom line is, we see from these psukim, and let's go with those who hold that the belt of even a kohen hedyet was dafkats from tzemer upishtim, and al pi chasidis. Why taka can they wear? Why can a kohen wear tzemer upishtim? And we also know that esodoy chaloisasa, even though midder rabbanon we don't wear a beged of linen when we wear our tzitzis, but midoy raisa, when you wear your tzitzis, when there is a mitzvah to wear tzitzis, then and ideally tzitzis should have on it tcheles, which can only be valid not only if it comes from the chalazon, but only if the dye is on wool. So you're going to have shatnez. So that's the whole sugya we had in the beginning of Yavamas. Esoday chaloisasa, you are allowed to do it, but why are you allowed to do it? So you should know that when you stand in a place where there's so much bittul, which is either in the Beis Hamikdash or when a yid is doing a mitzvah, you can reach such a high level of bittul b'mitzias that there's no world. Einoid mulmadoi. No, there's chesed, not there's digavura, there's nothing there. There's only God. If it's only God, then you're not mixing two opposite things. Only out there, beyond the tzimtzum, do you have an issue. Okay. And there's a medrash that speaks about in the Beis Hamikdash that there might, according to one opinion, there might not be an issue with basar b'chalav. It follows the same concept. And now let's go back to the beginning, guys. We are on top of daf ayin vav amid beis, and we're connecting the beginning of today's daf with what we're learning right now. Is that just like we established, when it comes to the isur of shatnus on bigadim, that it's only on wool and linen, and here again. And we spoke then about Negoim, big day, the Tumas Negoim. And now we spoke about big day Kahuna, that Mat Semer She'ein L'Shem Levai, as we quoted that pasuk from Melech Meshai, Uf Pishtin She'ein L'Shem Levai. So that means that if you would have a certain type of linen that is not called Pishtin, it's called Pishtin something Pishtim. In other words, it's a variety of linen. If in the holy tongue it's not simple Pishtim, it's unfit to enter big day kahuna. Now let's move on to the din of bittul. And again, guys, I want to make one premise. However, the isur of shatnez is only when you have completed fibers. We're going to learn a lot about that. There are 3 steps after which the fiber is called. Now it's spun, right? But any fiber in their unfinished state or in their raw state is bechlal not a problem. It's bechlal not a problem with shatnez. People don't make begadim out of it. It wouldn't work. But if one were to do it, there wouldn't be a problem. And that is the case of the Mishnah. The case of the Mishnah is that you had a raw wool. Let's begin. And you had in the raw wool, you had the raw camel's hair. And from that, you made the fiber of wool. So we learned in the Mishnah that if roiv, only roiv, if roiv is camel's hair, it's defined as camel's hair. It's not defined as wool. And now you can take this fiber and mix it with linen. That's what we had in the Mishnah. Now let's go in the Gemara. Rabbi Yoina, Ula. Rabbi Yoina, Luchayda, and Ula. Rabbi Yoina and Ula Bar Yishmael, in the name of Rabbi Lazar, say the following, that when you have tzemed or pishtim, if you have not what we learned in the Mishnah, tzemed and tzemed of camels. No, we have raw wool and finished linen, or the other way around. Raw wool, and you blended them together. So l'chayre, you would think it should be butter. So he says that it will never become butter. It will never become butter, even if the amount of raw wool is very little. But now that you're finishing this fiber and it has in it semed upishtin, you won't have the din of bitter. And the question is, why not? Why not? Why don't we say what we said in the Mishnah, that if you're mixing raw wool and camel's hair, you follow the roiv? So I want to read quickly. This is just fascinating. We're going to Babli. We're going to Nida. Babli Nida Samach Aleph Amid Beis. The second Toisvis and the Amid Dividi Amaschal Beged Shabbat by Kalayim. And why don't we say Bittel Beroiv by Kalayim itself? So Toisvis says something that's very challenging, but he writes V'yeshleimad Deloy Shayach Bittel Beroiv Ella Kishoha Isar Mu'urav Beheter. Kosher food, non-kosher food. Bittel Beroiv, or when you have a kashrus, you have to have Bittel Betam, Bittel Beshishim. Abel Kalayim Sheshneim Heter. They're both mutter, but the ne'esarim only al yedei ta'aroives. There is no Bittel Beroiv. Now, what's the kash on that? Asks the Rosh, what about Basar B'chalov? What are you talking about? But first of all, the logic is interesting. It was Isser and Heter, it's shaykh to have Bittel. Heter beheter, how do you have Bittel? God is saying, a chiddush, that even though this is allowed and that's allowed, God says, I don't want you to mix it. When Hashem says, I don't want you to mix something, then he doesn't want it to be mixed, even with the most minute amount.
Rabbi, one is not finished though. I'm sorry. One is raw. I don't get that. I thought this only applies if they're both in their finished state. But
now that you spun it together, Kavan, no, it's if I took raw wool and flax and I didn't finish it, it wouldn't be a problem. I know that. He's saying that now, if you spin it together, if you finish it together, now the wool is spun. Now that you spun the wool, you don't say, well, the majority of this fiber is linen. That you don't say. There's no bittel of semeropish. I just want to go back. The Rosh agrees with Tosis, but he says like this, that Basar B'chalav is unique. Basar B'chalav, we have a limud that Hashem prohibited the taste that one gives unto the other. And therefore, if the taste will be nullified, which is the concept of 1 in 60, then you won't have an issue. But you don't have such a concept of taste by begodim. And since to begin with, wool, I'm allowed to wear wool, I'm allowed to wear linen. What did Hashem say? Don't mix them together. In such a prohibition, there is no bittul. Now that's different. That's different, Kevin, when you have wool and camel. That's different. Wool and camel are both okay. Okay.
Rabbi, when you say no bittul, what does that mean? That the minutest amount would aserate? Is that what you're saying?
That will be all of the stories we'll have today. Yes. That's why we mentioned if I have a beggar of linen or of wool, and I have one thread in the hem that doesn't even go on my body that's made out of linen, many of the fancy suits that you buy today that I know, you can say 100% wool. And even when it's truthful, but you can have under the collar, and you can have where they strengthen the button area, the buttonhole, you can have linen. And it's in one little place. It answers the whole bag. Okay.
Why is it bittul when it goes to the Beit HaMikdash inside the?
We just mentioned that's from the Torah we learned that, and there it doesn't have to be you can have 50-50 because on that level, it's everything
is bittul.
Everything is God. Yeah. Okay, right. Let's go back to his halacha. You blended them together, Kevin, and I want to add, you're right. And now you made them into a final product. It remains us. There's no matter how little of raw wool is in the flax, the whole thing is us. But, you 1 second. You didn't do it yet. So what should you do? What happens if a little bit of raw wool gets into flax? He gives you a good solution. Now that the wool is raw, Kevan, so there's no problem yet. Now you can bring litra of oit semer gemalim. If you had a litra, now if you bring a larger amount of semer gemalim, of camel's hair, and you put it into the mixture, now you were mevatel it. In other words, since the Isser of Shatnez only begins when the wool is finalized, so as long as you put more camel's hair in the wool, they're both raw, and now you're finishing it. Now you were mevatel it. And similarly, Abba Barav Chuna in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Again, Chuna, L'chura, and Huna, we already spoke about that. Is the same L'chayra. That Semed Upishtim Sheterafam. He made a statement which appears to be arguing that if you have blended together raw wool and flax, you nullified it. We're going to see he didn't mean it the way you hear it. Rav said no. So when you heard about this, you thought that there's an argument of Amoyroim. And the Gemara says, my Palik, does Rabbi Yirmiyah argue b'shem? Do we argue with Rav? So the Gemara says, no. Rabbi Yirmiyah only said bitlan, like we explained, that ma da Amar Rav. When Rav said that it's also that is bisha asoy beged b'fnei atzmei. In other words, you had a garment and you had the raw wool and it got mixed into the flax, and now you finalize the fibers. Everyone agrees that it's also. Ma da Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, that it's going to be okay. That's only Bahahuda boy ma'arvaton im choiron ara aleph im acharon. If you added another product with the wool that's in the flax, the other product will nullify the wool when the wool is in an raw state, and now you can leave it with the flax. In other words, there is no bittul, there is no nullification of wool and linen. And based on that, listen to some amazing stories. Beginning with story number 1, Rabbi Hillel Bereb Volas. I don't know, to me, Reb Volas sounds like such an Ashkenazic Hasidic name. All the way back over there in Yerushalmi. The grandfather of all of us. Rabbi Hillel Bereb Volas. Reb Volas. Hoyloi Beged, he owned a garment that was B'shloishim Ribay Dinar. It was worth 300,000 dinarim. In other words, it was made out of linen, and there were certain linens that were extremely expensive. The Marav Fulda in middle says that it was such a special linen garment that if you wanted to, you could have folded it. It was so thin, it was so delicate that the whole beged took the size of a walnut. A pop-up beged. And that's why it was so expensive. So if he owned such an expensive garment, he decided, see, Rabbalas is a chassid, a rebbe, chassidim. He gave it to us, he gave it to Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He felt such a beautiful thing belongs with the tzaddik. Problem is that when Rebbe, it was a linen garment, and it was expensive linen, but Rebbe was so makbid on shatnez that he knew how to find, maybe there's one little fiber of wool, and he found such a fiber, and you know what he did with the garment? That was worth 300,000 dinarim. He burnt it. And now the question is, why did he burn it? Let him take it out. Here in LA, you buy a beged, you give it over here to the shatnez people, Amachaya, whoever knows where the address, you leave it Alta Vista, I think, you leave it off over there, and if they find shatnez, they remove it. The answer is that Rebbe was afraid that since he found a wool fiber, maybe there'll be another woolen fiber. Another din. There's no isser to own a beged of shatnez. The prohibition is only to wear it. But Rabbeinu HaKadosh didn't want for anyone to end up wearing it, not knowing that it's shatnez. So what did he do with it? He burnt it. Next story. Reb Mana, similar. He also had a garment worth 300,000 dinarim. And again, that l'chayda, the same idea. He felt such an expensive beged, he has to give it to his Rebbe. The Yabalei l'Rabchia bar Ada. And again, Rabchia bar Ada found kalayim in it. Now, there are two very different girsois. There's a machlekes really of the Marav Fulda and the Pnei Moshe. So the Marav Fulda learns it to be a similar story, that he found shatnez in it, and therefore Rav Mana told Rabchia bar Ada told Rav Mana, Zavant lemis, you gave it to the dead. Now, a dead person, right, doesn't have to keep the mitzvahs. So the tachrichen that are made for someone after they pass can have kalayim. So you gave me a gift of what I should wear for tachrichen. You gave me a gift when I'll be dead. And indeed, in other words, shkoyach. But it's a little bit of a dark gift. I'm giving you expensive tachrichen. Thank you very much. But that's what happened. Bahaba ilave, and he kept it with himself, not like Rebbe that burnt it. He kept it. Adahava machnach until he passed away. And when he passed away, he used the gift. He got buried. He got buried in that expensive 300,000 dinar garment. That's
What's
one
the
way.
deal? What's the deal with both of them being 300,000?
Well, first of all, it could be a guzma. It can be a guzma in the Gemara for sure. But according to the Maharafulda, the reason why we brought those stories is to point out that only Rabbeinu HaKadosh burnt it. That the other great tzaddik, Reb Chia bar Ada, kept it. But that's one version. The Pnei Moshe has a whole different version. And the whole different version is that it's not about, you're speaking about gifts. So the first story is about shatnez. The second story, the Pnei Moshe writes in the last couple of lines of the narrow lines, that he said that I don't want to take such an expensive gift. Amalei Zavant Lemesav, you bought a $300,000 suit to give it away as a gift. Like it's a very expensive gift. In other words, he did not want to accept it. But Rav Mana insisted. He insisted, and he says he made the bracha toiv u'meitiv, and he wore it. So it's a whole story about giving gifts and not receiving gifts. When they bought the Rebbe the new Cadillac, the Rebbe said, and he didn't take his new Cadillac. He went back in his old one. Sometimes people don't want to accept the gift. And sometimes if the tzaddik doesn't accept it from this story, insist. If it's coming from the right place, they'll accept it. Let's go weiter. Another story. Amar Rab Chagai. Guys, very few stories in Yerushalmi, so enjoy it. Amar Rab Chagai. That Rab Shmuel bar Yitzchak, Maisi Mana Mibei Katzor. He brought his garment back from the launderer, from the dry cleaner. Umeyatav ilave asara chutin. And there were different types. There were 10 different types of threads clinging to it. I just want to say like this, that it was common for launderers to stitch the name of the owner inside each garment. I know when our kids go to camp, that's exactly what we do. And still they don't get back their garments. Problem is that the thread, let's say he had a linen garment, but the thread that this launderer used to stitch his name in was a woolen thread. And he didn't stitch in one. He found 10. But let's go back to the story of Rabbi Hillel ben Volos and Rabbeinu HaKadosh. What's the problem? When you find 10 threads, he wasn't like Rabbeinu HaKadosh. He was suspicious that there might be more threads. So even though he already found 10 foreign threads that he removed, still, he examined it more. But he examined it thoroughly and then he wore the garment. Another story. Amar Rabbi Chagai, that Rab Shmuel, from the same Amoy, Rab Shmuel by Yitzchak, have a mefaked begoy beisa. He would instruct his household the loymoikma nevel the amar mikame nevel the chitan, that when they had the shmata business and they were manufacturing garments. So he says, don't even place the loom for spinning of wool near the loom for spinning linen, because little fibers can attach one on the other. Begin pifa because of attachment. Gavaldik. And once, like we said over here, that once you made a finished fiber that has in it wool and linen, it doesn't matter how little wool is in there or how little linen is in there. It's never nullified. And let's go weiter. So the Mishnah says,
Rabbi,
okay,
didn't we learn that the fabric is okay? It's just a Jew can't wear fabric that has, but I could sell.
That's correct. That's the whole chiddush of Rabbeinu HaKadosh that he burnt it. Yes. Let's go back. I want to have another line, just one more line. Hashirayin b'hakolach. So the Mishnah says shirayin is silk. Silk looks like linen. It's not linen. Kolach is something we're going to see what it is. Looks like wool. Said the Mishnah that you can make garments. You can mix them together. But because of Marasayin, you're not allowed to. And again, to remember that the Tur was the first one, and based on the Tur de Shulchan Aruch, they write that since nowadays people are very familiar with silk, there won't even be a marasayin. Today we are allowed to make a garment of silk and wool, and we don't say that silk looks like linen, even on the level of marasayin. So that we're beginning marasayin. So first of all, the Mishnah explains Hashiroyin. What shiroyin? Shiroyin is mitachsa. Mitachsa In Greek, Aramaic is linen. I'm sorry, silk. Shinayin is silk. Kolach, what's kolach? Is agvin kesarai. Agvin kesarai is a certain type of woolly substance that has a golden hue that grows on the rocks near Yam HaMelech or near certain bodies of water. And indeed, I'm sorry, one opinion is, I take it back. It's agvin. I don't know what that is from Caesarea. However, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Chizarti al kol mefarshei hayom. I went around to people and I asked them, what does it mean? And they told me kalcha shemoi. And I'm sorry, kalcha is a soft woolly substance that grows out of rocks, that comes out of rocks. And that's the point, that even though it looks woolly, it's midoiraisa, it's not wool. Wool is wool. Aval asurim mishum arasai. We'll stop over here and we'll